it's we call them miracles because we don't know how they happen.
Yeah,
And
and science
so,
science can't measure miracles, and science and though they call it what do they call it? It's a anomaly. Science can't figure out anomalies, and there's plenty of those too.
Yeah, like they
yeah,
don't believe in luck, but everybody says, "Oh, look, I got luck
Yeah,
on my side" or something.
but
But
there
if
are
luck
certain
isn't real, then what is luck? Why do we
right.
believe in luck?
hello everyone, welcome back to Outside of the Box podcast. I said it again, it's Out of the Box podcast. We're so glad that you're tuning in with us today. Today we continue to you know have our guest here today, Ethan Adcock, which is Steele's nephew, and so we're really excited bouncing off ideas today. And today we're gonna be talking about Steele. Let us know. Drum roll.
Let's start with like gaps in science, right? So we know that science, by definition, is the measure of, I guess, our reality in the most objective way possible, using the scientific method of having a hypothesis and then doing an experiment to test the hypothesis and see if the hypothesis is proven true or false. Now, you can never prove a hypothesis. You can only suggest that it leans one way or the other. Science doesn't aim to necessarily prove things. Science is more about statistics, math, and trying to strongly infer things. Like you can't, there's limitations on what science can do. Like there's certain facts, there's given facts, like we know gravity exists because we can see things fall and stuff like that. Do you know why it exists? That's another thing, right? Like science is good at explaining the what of reality, like what things are, but when it
But
comes
not the
to
why is.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So what are some things, Ethan, that you think science can explain in terms of why? You know?
Okay, so first I wanted to start off with like you were saying, we base a lot of like the science, we base that into our reality, like, oh, this is proven through science, so this must exist, this must be true, this has
Mhm.
to be because it's based off of science. And the thing is like science has been proven, like sometimes they've been wrong multiple times, when we
Yeah,
believed like the wrong misconceptions and stuff because they could have been off by the smallest minor things, but yet it's still the common average belief that if science says it is, then it is. um and so my thing is like how, like, because I'm a man that likes to believe in science. I like to see the evidence, I like to see the data and all that, but I always am questionable on the data and stuff like that because it is known that humans make mistakes. We make human errors all the time. So how, for me, it's hard to believe it 100%. Like it's a good thing to go off of to base off a
yeah,
lot
like
of
a guide.
beliefs. But yeah, like how can you tell me that's guaranteed whenever they've been proven wrong multiple times
Yeah,
as
yeah,
well?
yeah. There's a lot of human errors that can lead to mistakes, and some scientific studies have made mistakes, like the one about autism and vaccines. That was a huge mistake, and it's been misconstrued. But going off of what you just talked about, what do you think about that, Jose? Like science not being perfect, you know,
Yeah, I mean, I think how you said it, it's a practice of measurements. It's almost more than an ideology. I think people sometimes take it into an ideology, like science is almost like a religion to some degree. But I think science has sometimes has helped maybe even understand some parts of religion, and so I think they coexist together. And I think Albert Einstein said, the more I learn, about the world and things of that sort, the more I come closer to the belief of maybe a God existing, you know? And so that's interesting how, science sometimes coincides, but, to your question, I think that there is still, a lot of things that science cannot measure and cannot therefore prove to be truth. And since it's all based off of numbers and things that you can measure, then what happens, about the other realms, things outside of time, things
yeah,
outside of dimensions or of our dimension, parallel universes, and I think
Mhm.
some scientists have tried to get into the idea of it, but sometimes you can't measure completely everything, and
Yeah, because
so
if we look at the basis of
black
science,
holes, like
you,
all
you
that.
make a good point. Because like if you look at the basis of science, mathematics is the very strong basis for science. It's almost what science depends on. Maybe not in every single case, but like statistics, equations in physics.
Ratios and all
Yeah,
that.
all
Yeah.
of that. So like when you take math and you look at math, what is math? Math, some could say math was something that human beings created and we found a way to make it work. I don't know how, but we created it and it works. Somehow there's a pattern and it works. Or other people say we just discovered math in nature, and depending on
Yeah,
where you fall on
and
that, like if math is an illusion, then science is somehow still works, but it's kind of not perfect in some way.
yeah, and I guess you can break it down into hard science, which is more of like the biology,
Yeah.
the 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 like you said, chemistry, all those that do require a lot of mathematics, and then the soft sciences, which is like what we were talking about earlier, the
Psychology.
emotions, the psychology,
Yeah, exactly.
things that you can't measure. But I was talking to one of my professors who is a philosopher, and he was telling me that before, they considered philosophy as a soft
Yeah,
science.
that's where science came from. It was from
And
philosophy. Yeah.
so it makes you think, and how, through philosophy has turned into psychology, and a lot of things
Yeah.
have developed from that.
Yeah.
Um,
True.
so I mean, those are areas where we can't measure, and we're still discovering, like, what is, consciousness, what is, reality in itself. It's the big questions that philosophers have asked
Right.
for
And
several
science we
years.
still haven't figured out what consciousness is, and neuroscientists have studied it, but they still haven't found the exact thing that causes consciousness. And that, like we were talking about emotions, how do you measure emotions? How do you measure happiness? You can measure things on a scale with science, like weights on a scale or how much chemical is in a glass, but consciousness, I don't know. What do you think, Ethan, about all
Yeah.
that, like measurement?
So my thing with that is like I don't understand how they try to use like mathematics into like describing like the emotions and like scientific stuff that goes on with our body. Like I understand the basis, like kind of like common sense, how like the powers of tens, we have like 10 fingers. So we go 1 + 1 = 2. So I get the basis, like, every 10 is now 20. Like who says it just like when you get to the thousands, you go all the way to 100,000, then you get a million. But then once you get 999 million, it just goes to a billion. How come it's not 1,000 millions? And there's a lot of questions with math to where it's like I see a lot of good things with it, but I see a lot of inaccurate, a lot of questionable stuff. But then again, like what you were saying is science bases a lot off of math. But if math was man-made, per se, because we don't really know if it was man-made or stumbled upon. But if it was man-made, it goes back to human error. How do we know somewhere along the line they didn't make an error, and we're still basing off of most of our beliefs off of their human error over time? And
Yeah.
so maybe if there was a human error per se, and we've been going off of it, that would mean most stuff we believe in is a lie. And like you were saying, you can't measure emotions and like just stuff that we deal with daily. Like you can't measure, how do we know how to speak? You can't measure our
Yeah.
vocabulary by numbers and stuff
Yeah.
or the
Well,
sounds we make.
And so that if what you're saying is true and math is an illusion, then that's detrimental for science because that means all of science have been basing off is could be inaccurate and incorrect, and we could all be wrong. But going on like measuring happiness, because with all my psychology stuff, I had to take research classes in psychology, and I've learned about qualitative research. Quantitative research uses math and numbers and measurements. Qualitative is like what you're saying, people's words, what people say. So they conduct interviews on participants in these experiments of about like 10 people, sometimes more. And then they do coding, which is a research technique in qualitative research. And they try to find common themes in what these people are saying. And then they break those themes down into a research paper to try to figure out what it means. And that's more philosophical, I would argue, because it's not purely hard science like Jose was talking about. It's not hard science, it's soft science. And the problem with
Yeah.
soft science is like what you're saying, how do you measure happiness? Well, we have like how do you measure depression? Happiness is hard. Let's take something like depression, clinical depression. Well, we have the diagnostic and mental disorder manual, and then we have inventories, the Beck depression inventory that can measure depression. But even going off that, like what I was doing with my professor today, like we were trying to figure out how to do this inventory, and sometimes the data doesn't work perfectly. And so that's the thing about these inventories. While they're man-made, so they're not perfect. They're a measurement of we're trying our hardest to measure these emotions, but we're still not perfect at it, and that there's flaws in it. It's not perfect.
Yeah, and I have something to say on that. So I believe it was you I was talking with, and you said like depression also commingles with anxiety, right? You were saying something like that at one point.
Yeah, well, they can be comorbid sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. So how are they able to measure like there's a connection between them? How do we know that
Oh,
it's just not
that's
a
a good question.
complete
Yeah.
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
emotion we're
That's a very
experiencing?
good question. So, like, if you're saying measuring as in like how do we measure the comorbidity of depression and anxiety disorders, then that would be the answer to that would be they get a group of participants in a population, and then they run statistical analysis to try to get, just like how the US Census gets like data on percentages of the population that believe or do certain things. That's basically the, I guess, the same kind of deal they do with that. But in terms
Yeah,
of
but
measuring,
wouldn't there be too many variables though? Because if you line up like 10 people in a room and
yeah,
ask them to solve this math problem, like maybe two get the same answer and eight get different answers,
yeah,
wouldn't there be too many different variables to add up to equal
right.
one conclusive
That's why
answer?
even in the psychological sciences, experimental designs are so important, and that's why they're hypercritical. These peer review journals, they look for what you're talking about, confounding variables, which are variables that could
Certainly.
influence or bias
Yeah.
the results. And so you want to get rid of those. That's what me and my professor, we try to get rid of all the confounding variables at the beginning before we even do the study. And then even after the study, you can go in and try to take some of those confounding variables out to try to get to the as close to the truth as you can get. But like I said before, science can only get so far to the truth because
Mm-hmm.
there's no way to perfectly measure happiness. Jose was talking about consciousness. We can't measure our subjective consciousness.
Yeah, like what makes me and y'all, like me think different from y'all thinking different, or what makes y'all have different beliefs versus my different
Yeah,
beliefs. Like they can't explain why we all have our own intellect, like our own intelligence,
right. Everyone's different. Well, I wanted to add to that other thing we were talking about earlier about experiments, because you were talking about,
Mm.
well, what about all these differences? What if two people answer this, but 10 people answer differently? Well, that's where you have a control group and an experimental group. And then it gets even more complicated that if you go to different experimental designs, that's the most simplest approach. So the control group, or sometimes a placebo group, is the group that's going to try you're comparing to. That's what makes an experiment unique. You want to compare two different groups or more. Like I said, it can get more complicated. But let's just say two different groups because you want to make sure that, let's say you're doing a treatment for anxiety, you want to make sure that treatment works. But if you just do it on the people you're treating, it could be like, how do you know it works? Because you're not comparing it to anything but that group. So you take the control group who doesn't get their treatment and the other group that gets the treatment, and you can definitively say with a large enough sample, because if your sample's too small, that's another thing, to where you can't really trust the results. So you have a large sample that's enough to represent the population, and then you generalize those results when you compare those groups to the whole population of the world. So it's generalized, and that's why I say generalized, because even generalizing is not perfect, and you can't claim that this treatment, because it was proven in this experiment or shown, can apply to the whole world. Like that's not feasible.
So they can't claim that it's a 100%
Yeah,
accurate.
we're taught
Okay.
this. This isn't new to any experimental researchers. This is what we're taught in schools, and we're taught to question our own experiments. We're taught to make sure we're trying to be as objective and close to the truth as we can by basically covering everything I just talked about. But yeah, Jose, what do you think about all this so far?
You know, everything that we're talking about, science and gaps and all that, makes me really think about this scientist specifically. I don't know if you guys have heard of Joe Dispenza.
I
Joe
have
Dispenza he focuses mainly on, developing, well, what other people might call meditation practices, but it's really, so what his the background of his story is that he had a practice. He was a neurologist and all that. And, he happened to be in a marathon, doing riding his bike. And all of a sudden, I guess, there was an accident that happens there, and he ends up, fracturing his whole spine. His whole back gets shattered. So he goes through different, doctors and asks them their opinion, like, "Hey, what do I need to do?" And every single one said, "You need to get a surgery," and it was a specific surgery that he just didn't want to have. And so, being a doctor, he obviously went to the best and top known doctors out there. But, being that the same, response was given, and I guess he didn't want to hear that. He wanted to try something else. He decided to, close that door and try other things. And so what he started doing was, every day, when he was lying on bed, would start imagining his vertebrae coming together back in place, right? Imagining them, feeling
Like
the idea of
manifesting
them,
it.
yeah, almost like manifesting to that, and so, after some time, after, a couple weeks passed by, he was, able to stand on his 2 feet. And then after a couple more weeks, he was able to walk. And that was
Wow.
something that doctors said wasn't going to be possible, and then there's been countless other things, that, doctors said, this can't be solved, this can't be healed, this can't happen. And then miracles happen, what we call miracles. But, we call them miracles because we don't know how they happen.
Yeah,
And
and science
so,
science can't measure miracles, and science and though they call it, what do they call it? It's anomaly. Science can't figure out anomalies, and there's plenty of those too.
Yeah, like they
yeah,
don't believe in luck, but everybody says, "Oh, look, I got luck
Yeah,
on my side" or something.
but
But
there
if
are
luck
certain
isn't
things,
real, then what is luck? Why do we
right?
believe in luck?
Well, yeah, it's like, well, you can reduce something like love to these brain chemicals, but is that all it really is? You know?
That is
yeah.
true as well.
And what was interesting about this doctor is that, since he himself is a neurologist, uh, you know, a scientist, to if we could call it that,
To a
you
degree,
know,
yeah.
to a degree. And so, he took it in the aspect of, all right, let's measure how this happened, and let's see if we can recreate what happened to me to other people. And so he's been on this track of trying to figure out, uh replicating these aspects, or these miracles that, happen in our day-to-day life. And it all comes down to, our mind, honestly. So it's really interesting how powerful our mind is, and how, it can be our biggest ally and our biggest enemy as well. And so those are things that scientists haven't figured out completely, but it's still around, that leads to question, what are the possibilities of humankind. And
Yeah,
so
yeah. I see
that's
science as like this thing to where it goes here to here, but everything else outside this, it doesn't even try to answer. Like consciousness, happiness, emotions,
yeah,
why, the why behind everything. Like, why does gravity exist? Why does the universe exist? Why does life exist? Where did life come from? And why did life start from nothing?
yeah,
uh to add on to what you're saying, I believe it's in one of the books I let you borrow still, by mainly P. Hall, where he says the key to the universe is in our mind, and like when I read that, I was wondering, like, what could he possibly mean, but then, like you were saying,
that's so
if you
interesting.
think something enough, you can manifest in your mind, and then they say it comes true, which that comes again with prayer, luck, a lot of stuff, because we're always manifesting that in our mind. We're repeating it, repeating it, repeating it. And like people say, prayers do come true. That's also like a version of manifesting something in your mind over and over and over. Like maybe it's not like, because like, you can't wish in wealth, that doesn't always, you can't wish in material objects, but there's other stuff we are able to do, that isn't explained through science, as you can, like, someone who's told, hey, you have X amount of months to live, and then they're still living years later, and they proved everyone wrong. And it's like,
Yeah.
how are they able to do that whenever they were told, hey, you have X amount to live, but yet they defied all those odds that weren't able to be
Yeah.
defined, you know?
What I'm hearing you say is that, science can predict certain things, but when it comes to things like cancer or diseases that they say you only have this amount of time to live, science is not perfect at predicting how long they really have to live. It's a rough estimate. Just
And that
like,
comes back to the mathematics, you know, like we were saying, man-made errors, if that's possible. Because say they do use the equation of, oh, you have cancer. So they put your age, your day, or whatever in that equation, and it says, oh, yeah, you have 3 months. That's what the equation comes out every time. But if you beat the equation, so wouldn't that mean the equation's wrong, or
right.
are you
I'm not
just lucky?
sure. I'm not entirely
It's
sure
like the
how it
doctor,
works. I'm
they told
assuming it's
him,
probably statistics and based on past
yeah.
happenings of the disorder. But yeah, what was it?
But no, you know what's interesting, what this doctor Joe Dispenza has, found out is that there is a lot of, power in the way, prayer is done, and how, the unmeasurable happens, and it's so interesting because, it's not just saying the words or thinking the words or imagining, but also having the intention. And so and so it's almost like your whole body is in correlation with what you're thinking, what you're feeling. So it's a weird way how he explains it, but he has a couple books out there, one of them being, the supernatural self, how you we are able to it create, and he takes it more in the idea of, like, I guess maybe manifesting things.
Mhm.
But for a lot of people, who are more in the sciences and facts, maybe it is, like you said, the key is in our mind. And maybe think people, like, something that's more common is perspective. If you can change your perspective, you can change a lot of things. And sometimes people need that inner work, through meditation or through prayer, to really fix those blockages, that are stopping you from doing something, or
Yeah, funny you say that because I don't know if y'all know him, but I'm pretty sure everybody does. Logan Paul, he was talking about how, like, when he was growing up in the hard times having no views, he would look in the mirror every day when he woke up, and he would tell himself, I'm going to be the biggest influencer in the world. And then he just had his boxing match with Floyd Mayweather, and we all know that was a huge event. And he was saying, he woke up every day and told himself that, and he manifested in his mind that he would become the biggest and the greatest influencer in the world. And I mean, I would say he is one of the biggest right now, but he believes that it's from him manifesting it. So, is it possible for anyone to manifest anything in their mind, or is it just for certain things or certain people, like our calling?
Mhm. Yeah, I guess, whenever you keep an image, like, for him, for example, becoming an influencer, he had a reason why of living. He had a purpose and he had a goal, and you just kind of keep playing that in the back of your head. And when any distraction comes along the way, you're like, that's not gonna lead to my goal. And so you become, like, hyper focused in just achieving that and doing that. And it almost gives your life a purpose to some degree, if you kind of mentalize that over and over again, and gives you some sort of direction to, you would say. Because I think one of the things that happens nowadays is, we just kind of expect everything to fall in our laps, and I think that, we're doing less of, like, trying to go out there and find, what we want to have in our lives, instead we're just kind of relying on it falling. And I think that's where that idea of, kind of like the documentary The Secret, or just, being in your bed and just manifesting things and they'll just come to you. I think there's also that aspect of, like, action,
Yeah, you
like
have to go
really having
get it.
that
You
goal.
can't just think. Yeah. You
Yeah,
have to work towards your goal. You can't just be
exactly.
lazy and, like, oh yeah,
Have
I hope one
fantasies.
day. Yeah,
Yeah,
because
Yeah,
then, like you're saying, it would be a fantasy if you're not actually striving towards your goals. Because anybody can just lay in bed and think about being, famous or something, but if they're not actively working towards their goal, then how are they going to make it there? So like it goes back to, science can't measure that, like no one can measure how someone would per se manifest to be where they are in their life, it's unexplainable
All
per
right.
se,
Final thoughts, Jose?
Final thoughts. Yeah, well, I mean, there's so many gaps out there, especially in the soft sciences. But I think even in itself, in the hard sciences, there's a lot of things, that are still out there, and a lot of things that we just still don't know about, life in itself. But I think something interesting is that we can learn definitely from older generations, from our past generations, because sometimes what we might consider, woo woo or whatever, might be the unlock to our problems today. Like we talked before in our previous podcast, we have a lot of people who are very smart in different generations, and so they might have we can learn from those things in the past.
Yeah, definitely.
History repeats itself.
Wait.
Mm-hmm. And still, you go ahead before I finish. I would like to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I just agree, like I always go back to the why questions. Like you're saying, Jose, like the hard sciences even have gaps because the hard sciences, they explain what things are and what things do and how things happen, but they don't explain why they happen. Some of them maybe try to tap into it, but anytime you try to tap into why, it starts going into philosophy and away from science. So
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
that would be my final thing there. What do you think?
So mine is, which I try to keep this in mind every day, we're humans and it's in our nature to make mistakes. And so to me, you can believe what you want, go ahead. I'm a firm believer and you believe in how you want to believe. But for me, I remember it's another human doing this as well, so who says they aren't making a mistake? Who's not, like, how do we know no one's not questioning them on every single thing they do? Because say we don't question someone and they just say this is right, and then everybody believes it's right, but no one questioned to even see if it was right. So my thing is like, question all, but then again, remember, we're humans. So if there is a mistake, we can't hold each other accountable. We need to work together to figure out, the gaps and stuff instead of tearing each other apart by making a simple mistake here and there, because it's in our nature. I don't know one person who hasn't made a mistake, even like small ones. So for me, instead of the science field, like we talked about before, they're so fast to tear each other apart instead of to work together to find out, the proper solutions. So my thing is just, if we come together, I feel like we'd have more of an understanding instead of us too busy nitpicking the smallest things. But then again, if it's wrong, we need to fix it and address it, but not look over it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think that's very well said. I agree. Take it away, Jose.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for listening in today. If you're here at the end of the podcast, we appreciate you for your time. And also, please leave a comment. Let us know what you think about the different gaps in science. Maybe you have different ideas. We like to know what you think. Please leave that down below. Also, subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. And also, please leave a like if you like this video. And until next time, we'll talk to you soon.